Hey guys, we're talking British ghosts today with author Ruth Wylde. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. I am. We're waiting for our guests to come into the green room. But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I am also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means we can get to you. It might take us a little extra time because California is a big state, but we will get to you, honest. So the way to contact me would be via my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, or California Haunts Ghostly Events, or you can contact me at California Haunts here or California Haunts Radio, or you can get me over at TikTok at California Haunts, all lowercase, Instagram, Ghosty Gal, all lowercase. You can get to me also on Twitter at Cal Haunts. See, we're everywhere. And California Haunts Radio on YouTube. And that address would be youtube.com/ampersand California Haunts Radio. Welcome. We have a great show for you lined up today. She confirmed yesterday, so we're just waiting. So I just want to talk with you guys a little bit. I just got back from a week vacation in Southern California, Disneyland, all that stuff. It was a blast. Shot some really cool footage that I'm going to be working on here to make a compilation for you guys, so it's nice and clean. And also, you're going to see some weird things going on with the show because obviously I wasn't able to set up my guest last week like I normally do. So you're going to get some shows where we have a live guest, and some shows are going to either be me reading or like we did last week, best of shows. And that's going to be about it'll take about week and a half before I start getting back in the flow and then things start adding up enough to have consistent guests. Because normally I'm working every night, getting guests for you guys and stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, I'll still give her a few more minutes, and I've got the email open just in case she needs to get a hold of me. If not, then we'll just read today since I'm already on the air. And yeah, let me just check my inbox. I love this old inbox thing. There she is. I don't see her. Uh-oh. Okay, hang on. I think she's in the wrong room. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me send her a new link. Here's a new link to the show. I might have sent her the other link. Just hang on. She's probably in the other show. It gets confusing here sometimes late at night, so give me a second to get into StreamYard and I'll send her a link. So she's there. So try this link. I think I sent her the link for the other show. Because I've got 2 shows this week. So let me get a link in for her. Let me get a link in. Okay, let me email her really quick. Okay, Ruth. So she is here. See, my first day back to a regular show, and it's all screwed up. Story of my life. Just bear with me, Ruth. Yeah, we'll get this. Try this link. Okay, try this link. Try this link. Okay, yeah, I think I might have sent the wrong link to her. Okay. Okay, so 8. So there you go. Hopefully she'll pop into this room. It's going to be one of those days. Anybody else have a cocktail I can borrow? Okay, she can try that one. Just give us a second here. I might have sent the wrong link. So that one, 8Y99. Let's see what I actually sent Ruth originally. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's really weird. That one is an 8. Hang on a second. Just give me a second to figure out what's going on here with this because I just sent the link for the show. Looks like I sent the right link. Huh. 8Y99. And hers was G8. That's the link I have for her. So why isn't she in the chat room? DQ8. That's so bizarre. Okay. I don't know why that link's putting her somewhere else. Bear with me until I can figure this out here. This is crazy. She says she's in the green room. I don't see her in the green room. And that link should work. In fact, I want to click on the link and see if I can bring myself into the green room. So bear with me while I figure out what the heck's going on here. And get her in there. Let's see. I want to go to the link. Safari. Take me in. Let me test the link out. I should show up on the link. Sure. Okay, I'm going to show up on the link. This is going to confuse everything on the computer probably. Okay, I'm entering the green room, enter studio. We'll see what happens. Okay, I'll just say XXX. I'm just testing. Okay, there I am. So, okay. Okay, so the link does work. So let's wait and have her come in again. I don't know what green room she's in, but that link does just sent her does work. But anyway, I was gone for a week and got behind on my bookings. So I'm going to be working hard to get these bookings up again and rolling for you guys. So far, I've got a couple people. I got a couple people coming on this week that are going to be very interesting to hear. And it was an interesting trip. We also my benefactor, my friend that went with me is also sensitive, and she actually felt stuff at Disneyland, and she felt stuff in play. I never told her the stories about the different haunted locations at Disneyland, and this is where she felt stuff. I mean, there's a story of a little boy who had died, and his mother had his ashes, and she wanted to leave the ashes on the haunted mansion ride. Of course, Disneyland said no, you can't do that. She did it anyway, and there you are. I see you. There she is. I see her. She's waving. Anyway, I'll finish the story and then we'll get on with today. Anyway, so she did it anyway without telling the Disney people. And of course, they found out there's cameras everywhere at Disneyland. You can't sneeze without somebody saying. And so they saw, and I guess they went and vacuumed up whatever they could, clean it up. But his ghost is seen on the Haunted Mansion ride itself, and sometimes they'll see him riding the Doommobiles and things like that. But he also haunts the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. People have seen him on there. So the Haunted Mansion was closed when we were there, but my friend and I were on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and we get off, and she says, that was weird. And I said, what was weird? She says, I felt a real light energy sitting right between us during the ride. And I didn't say anything to her at all, right, about it. So I guess she felt the little boy. So I guess he was on the ride with us. So that's kind of cool. Kind of cool. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to tell a story here. I was about probably 12 or 13, maybe younger, when we visited England, my family and I. And we went through quite a few castles, quite a few haunted castles. And back then, being young and a kid, you have abilities, because the abilities go away later. Well, they either stay with you or they go away later in life because other things interest you and whatnot. So I had these abilities, and I remember going into these castles, and I would feel like I was being followed, and I would tell my mother this, and my mother would go, "Oh no, you're just being silly. You're just being silly." And I would say, "No, I feel like I'm being followed around in these different places in England." And when I was over in London and stuff, and since then I always did a lot of research on the ghosts over there, constant research. My cousins over there send me information. I've got relatives that live near London and Croydon and some other places, and they're always sending me information. So my guest tonight is going to be talking about ghosts, and she's written these books, wrote like maps on where these ghosts are and stuff. So let me bring her in. I'm not going to embarrass her by saying the wrong thing, so I'm going to let her tell me. Okay, here we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm really well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Tell me about you.
So my name is Ruth Wylde, and I'm an author who writes about the paranormal. So I first became interested in it when I was a kid, funnily enough, hearing you talk about when you were a child. But my reason was slightly different. We moved, I must have been about 12, maybe 13, something like that. And we moved to a different part of the country here in the UK in an old village called Wylde in the county of Hertfordshire, which is just about 50 miles north of London. And the house that we moved into had a very active poltergeist. It was only in later years that I learned that's what the term for it was and so on. All we knew at that time, at that age, was that there was something weird about the house and weird things would happen. So we'd have all sorts of strange occurrences. We'd hear strange noises, loud bangs and crashes in the middle of the night with nothing to explain it. Items would move. And there was a little bit of the typical, you put something down, you turn around, it's moved. And you think, was that me? Did I put it somewhere? Am I getting forgetful? But ours was actually a lot more direct than that as well, where it would just quite happily move things in front of you. So one particular occasion that I remember that I often talk about, I was in the kitchen at tea time with my mum and helping her to clear up the tea things. And there was a tea towel scrunched up on the side, a cloth for drying the crockery as you finished washing it. And we caught it moving out the corner of our eyes. So we both sort of turned to look and watched as it flattened itself out carefully and then folded itself once one way, once the other way, and then once again the first way to form a neat little square on the side, while my mother and I just stood there and watched it with our mouths open. Okay, that's not what tea towels normally do when you chuck them on the side. Sadly, be quite good if they did.
At least they're helpful. Yes.
Well, yeah, at least it was helpful. Other times it was really, really frightening. It would do, really scary things. But it made me really interested in what on earth was going on. My mother was a very practical type of woman. She'd actually been a radio engineer in the RAF, the British Air Force, when she was growing, when she was young, before she got married and had children. So she had a really analytical mind. She didn't get scared by that sort of thing. She would just look for an explanation. And I think I must have inherited that from her. So I'm going to give my age away now. I started going to the library, trying to pick up as many books as I could on ghosts, the paranormal, because this was way before the days of the internet. And much to my disappointment, all I could find was ghost stories about the old British castles, our old churches, graveyards, but these were all stories from hundreds of years ago, or the ghost was from hundreds of years ago. There wasn't anything about people living in a perfectly ordinary house like I was, experiencing things happening. And it made me want to find stories about things that people experience themselves. So I started collecting a database. I must only have been about 16 or 17 at the time. And I just kept on going with that for the rest of my adult life. Whenever I found a story about a haunting that was happening sort of within my lifetime, it would catch my eye and I'd add it to my database. And I'd got this sort of faint idea that it would be really interesting if you could find correlations. If you found more than one story from the same place at different time periods and from different people. So eventually, of course, time chunters on and I get older and older and older. And when I get to my early 50s, I was able, very fortunately, to take the chance of partial early retirement. So that left me with a few days a week to my own devices. And I thought, great, I can actually do something with my database now. So I started writing the books that I'd kind of always wanted to be able to read myself, which is books that tell people's own experiences, preferably in their own words wherever possible, without any embellishment, without any attempt to explain or categorize what they're seeing or feeling or hearing, but just reporting, these are the facts. This is what real live people are living with day in, day out, or come across once in their lifetime, whatever it might be. And this is what's happening. So that was in 2017 that I produced my first one. And I'm now researching for book number 7. So I've been going like the clappers ever since.
Wow. And I know over there, your haunted history over there is very rich history. I mean, it's everywhere. So how do you collect the information for your books?
I have my massive databases, and if you can imagine, I've been filling these up for 30 years more. Right. So I've got a source story that I found somewhere or other at some point in time, and then what I do is I go out on social media, and ask for, has anybody else experienced something in whichever location it is I'm researching on that particular day. And I'm always very careful not to say what it's supposed to be haunted by, because what I want to do is get people's own experiences. And that way, it's really interesting to see that some locations have 4 or 5 people get in touch with me, but they've each experienced something different there. And then other locations, 4 or 5 people get in touch with me, but they've all experienced something very similar, but maybe decades apart in the same location. So they don't know each other. These aren't people that have ever met or published their story. It's, it's never been told before. So for me, that's absolutely fascinating that they're experiencing something very similar to something that happened 10 years ago to another person that I've spoken to. And that's really how I go about it. And also shows like this are absolutely great, because I always say, please write to me with your own accounts. So any chance I get really to talk with people to say, tell me about your ghosts.
Well, in your, I'm going to say studies, because obviously you've been studying this stuff and putting these databases together. What have you seen is like a common thread in the ghosts over in the UK?
Well, it's hard to pull out a common thread, actually, because the stories are as varied as the people who talk about them. I had always got a hope that the data that I'm collecting, if you like, and that I'm putting down on paper for posterity would lead somebody much more clever than I am, and with a much better scientific mind, etc., than I am, to be able to answer once and for all, the age-old question: what is a ghost? What is happening? And what I'm actually finding is, I think there's more than one thing happening. I don't think one explanation. It isn't a case of one size fits all. So I think there's, if you like, there's various different threads. So I think some of the data I've got points to, a haunting is really a personal thing for some individuals, where they've got a relative, whatever, that seems to be in contact with them or trying to be in contact. Others seem to be much more just a residual echo of something that happened before, that just kind of goes on. Others seem to be really mischievous, deliberately interacting kind of haunts, which is kind of the one I lived with. And I guess the most common thread, if I was going to pick one common thread, it'd be there is an awful lot of ghosts in England who like to chuck themselves out on the road in front of cars. Quite why, I do not know, but I have got dozens of stories of people having something step out in front of the road, in front of their car as they're driving down the road, day or night. They don't seem to be picky, but they'll step out in front of a car and then disappear. So that does seem to be quite a common one.
I've never heard of that over in England. I'm learning something new today. I mean, we get those, but not like if you're talking, it's real frequent over there. We don't get those as frequently as you do.
No, we really do. Some bits of road seem to have it, almost weekly.
Wow. Do you think a lot of it is because of the history over there? I mean, we have history, but our history doesn't go nearly as far back, obviously, nearly as far back as the history over there does. So you think a lot of it has to do with imprints on the land, from the different battles and everything?
I think that must have a lot to do with it, truthfully. I mean, I was looking at a particular haunting today, and the property that it's in, parts of that property go back to 686 AD.
Wow, yeah,
so that's, I'm not very good at maths, so what's that, 13 coming on 1400 years ago, that kind of time. So 1300 years, whatever. That's a lot further back than humans in American history trace, right, as much, isn't it? Yeah. And certainly not to have a building of that age or anything. And some of the buildings that we just routinely take for granted over here, if you actually look up their history, a lot of them are at least 300 or 400 years old. Right. I mean, my own house that I'm sitting in, that's considered a modern house, is 102 years old. Wow. And this is considered quite a modern house. People would drive past it and not think anything of it.
Right.
So yeah, we do live in a completely, steeped in history landscape. We've got, all the stone circles, and I mean, obviously Stonehenge is the most obvious one, but we've got a load of stone circles. That's not the only one. I mean, the one nearest to me is the Rollright Stones. It's about 30 miles away or so. And I mean, they go back to Stone Age, so prehistoric times. And like you say, all the skirmishes, all the anguish, all the love stories that must have happened in all those thousands and thousands of years, I think do leave an imprint.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an element of it. So, yeah, a lot of history to pull on. Still haven't found a dinosaur ghost, mind you, but unless Loch Ness Monster could possibly
That's
be.
it. See, we do that, yeah. So when you were saying all that, I was just thinking, because when the United States was established, of course, it was you guys that came over here, and we're looking at, because right now I'm reading a book on the Salem witch trials, so we're looking at what, maybe 1500, the year 1500, 1600, that around in there, before the War for Independence and all that.
Yeah.
And you're right, we don't go back that far. It's amazing to even go back as far as the 1600s here. Everything is so young compared to the history you have over there. And then there's the stories of the Romans on the road, like you talk about the road ghosts. The legions of Romans that people will see. I don't know if it's in England, but like over in Rome and stuff, where they see them crossing the road, or they see them walk into a wall, and it's legions of Roman soldiers and stuff.
Yeah, we do get Roman soldiers, ghosts. We've actually got one of the entries in one of my books from the, thinking from the top of my head, is on it was quite an interesting one to research, actually, because the legend is that it's got Roman ghosts marching along it. And it's called 9 Mile Ride, this piece of road. It's down in Berkshire, which is one of the counties in England.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, it's supposed to have a phalanx of Roman centurions that march along it. So I did my usual going out on social media and starting to research it. And one of the first things I discovered was that there was no way that could be Roman ghosts that were marching along 9 Mile Ride, because 9 Mile Ride was only created in the 1700s. And it was created as part of the royal forests at the time. And it was one of the main sort of driveways through the forest for the King's Forest, for his hunting parties. And it was just called 9 Mile Ride. But just maybe 4 miles or so south of it, and running completely parallel to it, there is the remains of a Roman road. And I think what's happened over time is people have mistaken the stories of seeing the Roman centurions from the Roman road, and kind of moved the story to 9 Mile Ride, because 9 Mile Ride sounds more historical somehow, and it's a dead straight piece of road. And what they don't realize is the ancient Roman road, that is now just a trackway, is about 3 or 4 miles south of that. And the only thing the two things have in common is that both of them originate from the same point, and that point was an Iron Age hill fort. But it's quite likely that it was also used as a Roman way station for marching, because they quite often used old features to, park overnight at, or whatever. So it's quite possible Roman soldiers will have stayed at used the Iron Age hill fort as an overnight staging station sort of thing, and then carried on down the Roman road that they were making. So it's quite funny how we can shift our ghosts around.
Exactly. The other thing I was just thinking too is, when I was over in England back then, I'm not going to say how old I am, but okay, let's just say it was a while back. And back then, here in the United States with ghosts, we didn't think about our ghosts the way you think about them over there, because like you guys embrace that whole ghost history, and at that time you really did. Where over here nobody did that, and now we're just starting to get to where we embrace it. Okay, we have ghosts, it's cool, it's fine. But for the longest time it wasn't like that. I remember how odd I thought, and I thought it was funny, because you go over there and we're Henry VIII's castle, one of his castles, and oh yes, there's a ghost here, blah 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 blah. It's just unique, the different attitudes between how you look at your haunted stuff and we look at our haunted stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true, because we're so used to it just being a part of our culture. And I think actually, if you move around the British Isles, it changes even as you move around the British Isles, because we've got Scotland, England and Wales, a part of Great Britain, obviously. And I often find that I struggle to get people to answer me in Scotland and Wales. And when I sort of try and delve into why don't they like engaging about it, it's because to their they're so used, because they're, history goes even further back,
Right.
sort of thing. And there's, they've still got a lot of the Celtic culture and what have you, and Gaelic culture.
Mm-hmm.
That to them, me asking about ghosts is about as interesting as me asking, what did you have for breakfast today?
Right.
So, well, why are you interested in that? Everybody's had breakfast. Everybody's got a ghost.
Yeah.
We live with it every day. Why is that interesting? So I think you're right. It does have a lot of bearing in how cultures see it.
Yeah. Now you said your house is over 100 years old. Do you have anything in your house that you live currently?
I think we did have when we first moved in. We've lived here about 24 years now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had a few odd things happened when we first moved in. The house itself, before I bought it, was owned by a builder who'd only owned it about 2 years or so, not very long, because he'd bought it as a burnt out wreck and had then done it up to flip it and sell it on. And it had stood derelict as a burnt out wreck for, I don't know, at least 10, maybe 15 years, something like that. And the previous owner had died in the fire that burned the house out. So when I moved into the house, I actually moved in just before I met my husband. I bought the house on my own, and the first night that I was about to stay here, one of the neighbours, because I was just moving from one part of the village to another part of the village, one of the neighbours said, "Oh, what are you doing down this end of the village, Ruth?" I said, "Oh, I've just bought this house. I'm moving in, "Oh, you're moving into the haunted house?" It's like, oh, don't tell me I've got a ghost here. I said, "Oh, yeah, we often see the old man looking out of the window. The old man that died in the fire."
Sure.
Now, I've never, ever seen anything, never, ever felt a presence. But there was one particular night when my husband and I came in from the pub and we were having a blazing row like couples sometimes do. And as we walked down the hallway, my husband was ahead of me and our lounge is off to the right, which is where the fire started originally. And it was determined that it was started by the old man falling asleep while smoking a cigarette. And as he walked past the lounge, he threw his cigarette packet and lighter into the lounge in a bit of a temper. We carried on through to the kitchen, put the kettle on, calmed down, and went to have a cigarette. He went to retrieve his cigarettes because he and I smoked a different brand at that time. Neither of us smoke now, but back then we did.
Right.
Went into the lounge. These cigarettes were nowhere to be found. Could not find them anywhere. So in the end, he had to smoke one of mine. And of course, the next day I searched everywhere for them. And for the next couple of days, couldn't find them. Could not find where this packet of cigarettes had gone. And then about 6 or 8 months later, we walked again from the pub one evening. And there was the packet of cigarettes sitting on the arm of the sofa with the lighter neatly on top.
Wow.
And we knew it was the same packet of cigarettes because that week that we'd had the row, it so happened that he'd bought some off-duty ones. And so they had the different label on. And that was the only time he'd ever been able to get any of those off-duty ones. So, and this packet that was sitting on the sofa arm had the label on. So we knew it was that same packet that had gone missing months earlier and now was suddenly sitting on the arm of the sofa. And I often wondered about that because the chap was supposed to have died, because of cigarette smoking, and whether because we walked in yelling, it kind of stirred something up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But other than that, thank God it's quiet. And none of them followed me home yet.
He must like he must like you guys, because a lot of the time the reason why you have problems when you move into a house like that is you start making changes, they don't like it. And
well, it can be, yeah. I've got quite a few where activity seems to ramp up because there's been changes at the home. That does seem to be quite a common denominator as to what starts activity.
Now there's a lot of sad tales. I mean, we have some too up in our gold country and stuff. What's one of the more heartbreaking tales that you have heard in your studies?
It depends whether you're talking about individuals or the sort of more famous ghosts. So if we start with the most famous ghosts,
sure.
I think Anne Boleyn, I always think is a very sorry tale. Her ghost, she was one of the 8 wives of King Henry VIII, the very famous married, divorced, beheaded, etc. rhyme that goes with that. Anne Boleyn was one of the ones that was beheaded. And her ghost is supposed to haunt in at least 7 or 8 different locations around the UK. So she's supposed to haunt her childhood home, the home she was living at, ancestral home when she met the king, the palace that she lived at the king with, the palace that the king proposed to her at, and of course the place where she, lost her life and so on. So there's all sorts of places she's supposed to haunt. But I always think she's quite a tragic figure because she was only 16 or 17 when the king married her. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of shoved in front of him as, he was known to be a bit of a lech, and he wanted an heir really badly, and his first wife had failed to produce a male heir for him. And it was really the ambition of her father that put her in his sights. And he married her, and she didn't manage to produce the male heir. So within a very short time span, he had her beheaded and moved on to the next one to try and get this male heir. But in that very short time span, he'd completely changed the face of UK history forever, because the church wouldn't let him marry her, the Catholic Church, because he was already married and divorce wasn't allowed. So in order to make divorce allowable, he changed the Church of England was created, and we broke away from the Catholic Church, and it became the religion that you had to follow was the Church of England. And it meant that all the monasteries and abbess houses and so on were all seized by the crown, and monks and nuns were literally chucked out on the street. Like I say, completely changed the course of history, all for this poor young lass who, was sort of wed up to this much older man by her ambitious father. Within a very short, I think it was about 2 or 3 years, if that they were together, before he had her beheaded. And before beheading her, in order to make it legal that he was going to behead his own queen, he accused her of being a traitor, and said that she'd, had relations with her brother and various male courtiers. And there's no evidence that was ever true, right. Historical evidence. So it looks like this poor girl had quite a, run around. One version of history. It's hard to tell because it's so far back, and historians are divided about whether she was a little minx with her own political agenda, or whether she was a pawn of her father's political agenda. But either way, she definitely had a very tragic life. So I always think her ghost is really sad that's around. But I think the one that tugged my heart the most for people's personal stories, and it was a very simple little tale actually, and actually quite a funny one, but it's one that just shows, if people are still around. And it was sent in to me by a reader, and he was explaining to me that his grandmother had passed away some years ago, and she had loved him very dearly. They'd had a very close relationship, and they were always sort of pulling pranks on each other. Years had passed. He was now living with his girlfriend, but they'd gone to, at this particular point in their lives, they were living back in the house that had been his grandparents' house. And he and his girlfriend were in the habit of getting up every Sunday morning and cooking a cooked breakfast as a treat. And they kind of, like we all do, got into a right routine about how they did it, as who cooked what part of the meal. They shared the chore. They'd have the radio on. It was a real highlight of their week to spend some quality time together as a couple. And they always cooked exactly the same breakfast, which involved 5 sausages. She'd have 2 sausages. He'd have 3 sausages, along with obviously the rest of the cooked breakfast. And this particular morning, she was cooking the sausages as usual. And he said it was almost like a dance, the two of them around the kitchen, as they moved around each other, each cooking different elements of the breakfast. And when the sausages were ready, she turned round. He'd already put a plate ready to receive them on the table. She turned around and tipped them out on the table. He turned around to put the other elements of the food down. They went to serve it, went to sit down, and he suddenly says, "You've only cooked 4 sausages." And she was like, "No, I've done 5." He said, "There's only 4 sausages on the plate, but I've cooked 5." So they're both staring at this plate of 4 sausages. I think, well, one must still be in the pan. No, one, perhaps it rolled off the plate. So they're checking under the table. Is it somehow rolled off the plate or something? Could not see this fifth sausage. So he's grumbling at her, "Well, you'll have to just have 1 sausage," or she was, "You'll have to just have 2 sausages. Never mind." And he turns around to get the cups of tea off the side. She turns around to sort of pull the chairs out. They both turn back. There's 5 sausages back on the plate. When a moment before there had definitely only been 4 sausages. And he says the only thing, thinking back over it, he can remember staring at that plate with the 4 sausages on and thinking it looked like there was 4 sausages and then a blur. And to this day, he feels like his grandmother was in the kitchen and was holding her hand over the 5th sausage as a ghost, if you like.
Right.
And was therefore kind of hiding it from him,
That's very cool.
Isn't that sweet?
That is sweet. That is very, very cool.
Yeah.
I never even thought about that. That's kind of cool. I have to watch the next time I cook. Good Lord. Good Lord. So you amass these stories, and obviously you do research on them, like going back to the Roman road thing. How time consuming is it to go back and do all this research so that you can write these books?
You wouldn't believe how much time it takes. I mean, I'm still partially retired, so I still work a real job 2 days a week. Originally, I was 3 days a week, but I dropped it down to 2 to make more time for the books, which gives you an idea of how much time it takes. Because if you could imagine, one of the entries in one of my books is maybe half a page to a page long about a particular story by the time, a particular ghost, whatever. I worked out once that will take me anything up to about 10 hours to create that one bit, because you've got to find the original story, then look up the history of the place, then look up the history of the building or the road or whatever it is, wherever the location is. Then I tend to go and look at it on Google Maps, so that I can visualize for myself what the person is talking about. Then I have to go out on social media, wait for all those answers, collate all the answers,
right.
Answer all the people. And the funny thing is that normally, if I go out saying, has anybody seen a ghost in this particular church or whatever, I might get, say, 30 answers back, of which 5 might be about the ghost I'm asking about. 5 will usually be some complete idiots making silly comments about ghosts. And the other 20 are people saying, well, I haven't seen that ghost, but I've seen a ghost somewhere else. So then I've got to add those other 20 to my database. Right. Ready to look into later on. So it's kind of like this thing that keeps just growing and growing and growing. So I think I'm going to be like painting the Forth Bridge, we call it in England. There's a particularly big bridge in the north of England called the Forth Bridge. And the story goes that once you start painting one end, by the time you get to the other end, the first end needs painting again. So, it's the saying is, it's like painting the Forth Bridge, you'll never finish. Absolutely. And I think that's the situation I'm in.
The other question I have with this along that line now, when you look back in history at these stories, do you see like you were saying about changes and how the stories go? As you look at these things, you go back, you get the original account or try to find the original accounts of these things. Do you find that the more modern we get, that the stories kind of get switched around or embellished?
Absolutely, definitely, yeah. And I think there's definitely a different way in which we tell stories now compared to historically. So, an example of how they get switched around. I had a particular source story. It was down in South Devon, and everywhere I found this story, I'd found it in several books and newspaper clippings, all mentioned this one particular village in South Devon and the piece of road outside it. And they mentioned a pub that was along this piece of road. And they all cited the ghost as being a particular, I think it was the figure of a a woman with long hair, if I remember rightly. When I actually started to try and research that and looked at the village and looked at the road, that's fine, that was all there. But nowhere could I find this pub that they were all referencing. So I started to think, well, has the pub been demolished, changed into something else? That often happens. But after a while, it took me quite a while to figure it out. I eventually found out that there was another village in North Devon, about 80 miles away, that had the same name. And that village had the pub. And it was that stretch of road that had the ghost. So all these other publications had got the location wrong. And when you then went to the right village and asked people about the ghost along the road outside this pub, you got loads of answers. And so that's why all the other publications have got one sighting of this ghost, because whoever first picked that up cited the wrong village. And then everybody else has just endlessly repeated that. But if you pick up the right village, you get the right road name and the pub on it, and then you've got the right ghost. But in terms of the different way we tell ghost stories, I mean, this is one of the things that I got fed up with when I was a kid looking for answers. In the Victorian times, and even, right into the probably 1950s, 1960s in the UK, people writing ghost stories or writing about ghosts, they were very fanciful stories, really. And there may well have been a kernel of truth in them about the actual haunting, but all of them ended up being, there was something moralistic about the tale, and they all found the, if it was a weeping woman or whatever was supposed to be the ghost, they all found that the person seeing the ghost would then wake up 2 days later and happen to have a conversation with the shopkeeper who would tell them that it was the bride who died in the room they were staying in, and the story always got neatly tied back round into a sort of nice little tight story with a bow on it,
Right.
Whereas the reality that we get now when we tell stories now is we just tell it as it is. We don't try and make up an ending to tie it all into a neat little package. So I think that has changed for the better, I think.
Why do you think people like ghost stories?
Well, do you know the funniest thing about that is I meet a lot of people who are utterly fascinated by it. Like myself, just live and breathe, the interest in the paranormal. And I meet a lot of people who, when they, you get chatting to them and they ask what you do, and you say, I'm an author, or what do you write about? Or I write about ghosts. Oh, I don't believe in ghosts. But I would lay money on the statistic that out of those, I bet 95% of them end that sentence with, mind you, there was that one time when. And I think one of the reasons we love ghost stories so much is that endless curiosity that the human mind has got. Plus, I also think we like to be scared a bit. I think there is an element of that. We all do like to be scared a bit. But it's curiosity, isn't it? It's curiosity about the world around us. And for so many people who research the paranormal, there's a saying that the more you look into the paranormal, the more it'll look back at you. And I think that's true to an extent. But I think what's more true is the more you look into it, the more you learn to look carefully around yourself. And then you start to spot the anomalies more, because you're watching more carefully. I've got so many stories in my books of people who were interacting with a ghost and did not realise they were interacting with a ghost right up until the moment when something totally weird happened. And that begs the question of how many times does that happen and people stop the interaction before they get to the weird bit. So they never realise it was the ghost that they were dealing with. And if I give you an example of that, one reader told me they were driving home late at night from a shift. It was about 2:00 in the morning and they were in Wales, driving along a piece of road. It was winter time, it was quite cold. And they suddenly noticed walking along the road towards them, on the pavement on the side of the road, a young girl, late teens, early 20s, sort of young, dressed in quite flimsy clothing, like she'd been to a club or out clubbing or whatever. but she wasn't wearing a coat or a cardigan or anything. So she just got this like very strappy, flimsy clothing on. And he kind of glanced at her and thought, isn't she cold wearing that? And then the thought kind of came, actually, is she all right walking along on her own at 2:00 in the morning? Is something wrong? Why hasn't she got a coat on? And he was just debating with himself, should I stop and see if she needs help? But there again, she's a woman on her own. It's 2:00 in the morning and I'm a man alone in a car. Will she feel that's more threatening if I stop than if I don't? What should I do? And he's kind of having this debate with himself. And therefore, he's watching her as she walks. And as he watches her, she turns into the gateway of the cemetery she was walking next to. And at that point, he realised she had no legs. So where he'd been looking at her, if she'd been wearing something more, if she'd had a coat on, he would have just thought, oh, there's a lady walking at 2:00 in the morning, and would never have thought beyond that, because he'd never have noticed that the last bit of her legs were missing. It was only because he was watching her and worrying about her and thinking, should I stop and try and help, that he suddenly realised that, that the last bit of her legs were missing and she was actually floating along. And it's that kind of thing that makes you realise that a lot of the time people might not even realise that they're seeing a ghost.
Makes sense. Now,
Scary.
It is. With you writing this stuff and compiling it, do you have visitors? I mean, you must. They must come to visit you every once in a while because you've got so much of this stuff.
So far, and I'm going to touch wood while I say this, they haven't come to the house.
Okay.
And as far as I'm concerned, they can stay out of the house. Thank you. I go ghost hunting. I don't want them coming Ruth hunting.
Right.
But having said that, there is one particular ghost where, apparition, I should say. There's a road just north of where I live. It's only about maybe 7 miles away or so. And somebody brought to my attention, because he had heard that I wrote books about ghosts, that he'd heard of a ghost along this particular bit of road. So I added it to my database, started researching it in the normal way, and very quickly got 3 or 4 other people that had experienced it. And then my own husband, who doesn't believe in ghosts at all, said, I've seen that figure along that road late at night. I just thought it was an ordinary bloke. So, of course, I got very fascinated by this, about how many times it's been seen in recent years. And it so happened that I needed to drive along this road every fortnight, late at night. So for a whole year, as I drove along this road late at fortnight, every fortnight late at night, I would slow down at the bit where the ghost is meant to be seen, turn my music off, and avidly look for the ghost. One particular night, I've done this as usual, no sign of the ghost, carried on through the next village and out of the next village. As you come out of the next village, the road ahead of you is pretty straight. So as you've got the main beam of the car on, you can see right to the end of the main beam, if you know what I mean. But just out of that village, there's my friend's farm is on the right-hand side. And at that particular moment in time, they were having trouble with people breaking into the farm. So every time any of us drove past it at night, we'd just turn and look and make sure everything was okay. So I turned my head to look at the farm. Yep, everything's okay. Turn back to look at the road. Nothing ahead of me on the road. As you pass his farm, there's then a turning on the right, going somewhere else. As I got level with that turning, all of a sudden, the figure was right there by my car.
Wow.
Literally right by my car. And he was facing away from me, and he had his shoulders hunched and his head bowed down. So I never saw his face. But he was clearly right there. Because obviously I'm travelling forward and he's standing still. So I whizzed past him quite quickly, if you imagine. And I kind of whipped my head round to see him as I drive past him. And I see him as I drive past him. Then I look in the mirror to see him gone. So as soon as he'd gone past me, he disappeared. Or as soon as I'd gone past him, I should say, he disappeared. And I've been too scared to drive along that road on my own ever since.
I don't blame you. As a journalist and a ghost hunter on the side, I used to get all the assignments having to do with ghosts.
Yeah.
you know. And it's a weird feeling, like you've experienced ghostly activity in your house, so you know what that feeling is when they're there. And
Yeah.
when you go in and you're trying, just like what you're doing, you're trying to get the facts straight. You got your notepad or whatever recorder, and you're trying to get, okay, here's this wall over here where this thing's been seen. And that feeling of being watched when you go into a haunted location, what's that like for you, especially over there?
Do you know, you can really tell when you walk into somewhere if it's got an atmosphere. Um, and it might be that it's got an atmosphere sometimes and not other times, but some
Mm-hmm.
places have an atmosphere all the time. So 2 examples of that, just properties near where I live. There's a
Sure.
particular farmhouse not far from where I live that every time I drove past it, I got a really bad feeling about it.
Mm-hmm.
Really bad. And then one day I drove past it and there was a for sale sign outside. And then very quickly over the next couple of months, it obviously got sold. The new owner razed it to the ground and built a posh new farmhouse with big posh gates and walls and everything in its place. And of course, every time I drove past, I was kind of looking at this thinking, oh, good, I'm quite glad they've demolished that because it had such a bad feeling about it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, quite quickly, the new house was built and a big posh house looked really nice. And at first, I'd drive past it and that horrible feeling had gone. But then the years started to tick by and the new house started to get a bit weathered looking, time's passing. And the more it weathered, the more it seems to look like the original house.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that feeling is coming back. So now when I drive past, I find myself averting my eyes slightly because it feels uncomfortable on the landscape. So I definitely get that sort of feeling about places. But then conversely, we've actually got a ruined, one of the British great houses, but a ruined one, very
Mm-hmm.
close to us called Houghton House. And they think it was the inspiration for House Beautiful in the John Bunyan Pilgrim's Progress books.
Mm-hmm.
And it was built in, I think, the 1700s, 16 or 1700s. Was in use for about 80 or 90 years, 100 years, not very long for a stately home. And then it fell into disrepair and, quickly fell into ruin. So all that's left standing today is some walls and some bits of window corbelling and a couple of pillars. But it's an absolutely beautiful location. It stands quite high on a hill overlooking a view. And I quite often go up there with my dogs, or dog now. And it's known to have shadow figures seen at it. And I can pretty much tell now the days when I'm likely to be able to see the shadow figures compared to the days when I'm not. Because as
Mm-hmm.
soon as you walk up, the atmosphere is different. So
Right.
some days you walk up and it's, whether it's windy or raining or snowing or sunny or whatever it is, because, I'm dog walking, you've got to go out in all weathers. The atmosphere will be perfectly just normal. It's just whatever the weather is. And then other days you walk up and even though the weather might be doing whatever the weather's doing, the house feels very still and very calm. Even if it's blowing a gale or raining, the house feels different. And on those days, I know that if I walk back up its long driveway and then turn around and watch, so I'm looking at it down its long driveway, if I wait long enough, I'll see the shadow figures start to move about. And so that one definitely, its atmosphere changes when something's going to happen.
I've had experiences like that myself. Where I used to work for a newspaper was right next to this opera house. That's certified haunted, and there were stories of somebody before their, I don't know why there was a door there, but somebody had walked out this door on the second floor and fell to their death. And so I would get off work at like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, right? And I'd be walking out, and my attention was always drawn up to that particular window, and I always found myself running to my car. No
Yeah.
reason, just the thought that I don't want to be out here. I don't like something staring down at me. I don't want to be out here. So I would find myself running to my car, and it's not a very comfortable feeling. Even
No,
though there's not supposed to be anything in it that's negative, still you still get that feeling that something's watching you.
it's funny because I mean, I do quite a lot of ghost hunting. You know, I go out investigating places myself a lot, or as much as I can. And mostly I don't get scared at all. You know, if something happens, I'm the one that goes straight back into that room in the dark on my own and waits for it to happen again so as I can document it. But that figure on the roadside that I just told you about, there was something about that figure, even though he was facing away from me. So I couldn't even see his face. So I couldn't say, you know, that he had an expression or anything.
Right.
There was just something about it that left me too frightened to want to see it again. You know, and that is just a feeling, and I can't explain. But interestingly, because like I said, I was doing the research out, you know, as normal for that piece of road. Two people have said to me, I've never seen anything, but that road, I've always thought of that road as really creepy with a horrible feeling. And one of the people who actually saw it, their account said she and her husband saw it at 3:00 in the morning. They'd actually had to leave home to go and catch an early flight. So they were leaving at, you know, 3:00 in the morning to set off. And they saw him then. And he was facing towards the car when they saw him. And they both thought he was a real person. And they had continued to think he was a real person until they saw me asking about a ghost along that road. And it was only then that she wrote to me and said, you know what? I'm beginning to wonder if what we saw wasn't in fact a real person. Because the one thing that's always puzzled both me and my husband about it is he's sure the man had a beard. I'm sure the man didn't. He said, but both of us, he had to swerve the car to avoid hitting him because the figure was standing in the road when they saw him. 3:00 in the morning. It's quite an old gentleman, the figure. This road is quite isolated, quite rural. There's no way you'd be walking along it normally. Just no way. And especially not at 3:00 in the morning. So both of them, as they swerved round him and carried on, well, what on earth is that person standing in the middle of the road for? We better go back and check. Maybe his car's broken down. Maybe his car's gone in the ditch. Maybe he's an old man with dementia who's wandered off. You know, what could it be? What could it be? And they drove along discussing whether or not to go back and why he would be standing in the road, but still not turning the car around and going back. And they got further and further and further away. And in the end, she says, we justified to ourselves that we weren't going to turn around and go and see if he needed help, because it might be one of those scams where one person waits in the road and then when you pull up, the others jump out the hedge and rob you.
Right.
She said, deep down, we knew that wasn't true, even though we kind of used it as our reason not to do it. Because why on earth would somebody stand out at 3:00 in the morning on a road that hardly anybody ever drives down in order to jump out and rob them? You'd be stood there for 4 or 5 hours before a car came. It doesn't make any sense. And it was only when she saw my post and wrote to me, and I then wrote back to her and said what other people had been seeing. She said that it was a ghost that we saw. So yeah.
Well, when you talk about you seeing it as something different than your husband sees it at, it comes down to work, like even for journalism school, police school, and all that. You know, when you're sitting in a big room and you've got like 12 other people with you, and all of a sudden somebody runs through the room.
Yeah.
And then, all right, tell me what you saw. And then everybody doesn't have the same appearance that they saw. And I think it's just for us to see things differently in a snap like that.
And it's really interesting. There's a lot of studies about exactly that kind of scenario. How if you as the interviewer asking the 12 people in the room, what did they see? If you say to them, did you see a man wearing a black hoodie? They'll change their story to, oh yeah, I think he was wearing a black hoodie. So it's very easy to influence memory.
Yes.
Which is why, obviously, you know, in police interviews and things, they separate people as quickly as they can in order to get the uncontaminated story, don't they? And I think that's one of the reasons why the paranormal is so hard to pin down, because it's difficult enough if you interview people immediately after it happens.
Right.
But quite often I'm interviewing people a decade after it's happened, or 2 decades after it's happened.
Right.
And there's been plenty of time for their memory to shift and warp slightly, hasn't there? Plus, like you say, there's also the person who was with them might not have seen it, might have seen something different. I've got so many accounts where, especially the ghosts that jump out in front of cars that I was mentioning earlier, quite often there's two people in the car, and one will see the figure step out and scream stop, or if it's the driver, do the emergency stop, and the other person is like, what on earth are you doing?
Right.
What are you doing? There's nothing there. But then on other occasions, people see exactly the same thing. Right. So yeah, there clearly is more at work than just a replay or just, if there's such a word, a spirit walk. Because if it was just a spirit walking in front of people, then everybody would see it, wouldn't they? There must be something about the connection between viewer and object being viewed.
Right.
That changes. So yeah, this honestly, this is why it keeps me fascinated forever.
Or one person's more sensitive than the other person, sitting in the vehicle.
Yeah.
I've had that happen where somebody says, hey, there's a fog coming towards the car. And I'm like, I don't see it. I don't care. And I'm scared to death. I don't know why. I don't see it. I don't care. I'm driving. Leave the fog there. I don't care. I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So you wrote these books, and you kind of made like I'm looking at your last book. I'm going to flash this up here real quick. Let's see what we do. There we go.
Yay.
Road. Okay, tell me about this book.
So, I wrote the original. You'll see that this one says Volume 2.
Yes.
I wrote the original Roadmap of British Ghosts, which just is called the Roadmap of British Ghosts. No volume to it. Because I intended that first one to be the definitive work on the ghosts that haunt British roads currently. Silly fool that I was. So I wrote the book, emptied my database into it, was all chuffed with it. Whilst I was researching for it and going out, asking for people, I had that thing happening where people say, I haven't seen a ghost where you're asking, but I've seen a ghost somewhere else. So my other database was filling up nicely of ghosts in people's houses or buildings or what have you. So the next book I wrote was called, after the first roadmap, was called These Haunted Times Volume 1. And whilst I was writing out to people, on social media saying, loads of people writing back with blooming road ghosts. And I was checking back to my book, The Road. I haven't got that one. And I haven't got that one. Oh, no, and now somebody's given me another one on that one. And before you knew it, I had enough to make Volume 2. So from now on, I am never writing a book that isn't called Volume 1 if I change the title of anything, because it's obviously going to happen that there's going to have to be a Volume 2. So this is, having written the roadmap, the original,
right.
This is ones that the Roadmap of British Ghosts Volume 2 is ones where people have written to me and said, but I have seen something along such and such a road. And then I've gone out and done my usual research on that road and found other correlations. And some of the stories have got some brilliant correlations now where I found more than one witness, sometimes, quite close together, sometimes decades apart. But yeah, it's the thickest of my books yet. So I apologize for the fact that it is slightly more expensive for the others, but I just couldn't bear to take any of the stories out because they were so good. So sorry.
So does this allow people to take your book now they can go driving through the countryside and find these different roads?
Absolutely. So it's laid out county by county. Both of them are, both the original roadmap and this one. So if, for example, you were visiting Britain and you were going to be staying in Oxfordshire, for sake of argument, you just need to open to the Oxfordshire chapter and it'll tell you which roads are haunted, and what by, and who, how many times it's been seen and so on. And it means you can literally, if you're a ghost hunter, with all of my books, actually, you can literally use them as works of reference, if you like, to help you when you go out ghost hunting.
Right.
And like I say, because it's laid out county by county and it gives the road and exactly where on the road. And in a lot of cases, as I was explaining earlier, I've actually cleared up exactly where on exactly what road it is supposed to happen. Because the other thing I'd find is that people take the story from a source they find, and they don't think to check and update it. They just repeat it. And the road names have changed since, or the road number, there's been extra roads built in the area or whatever. Whereas in my books, I do check, is the road still called the A6 or whatever, at that point, or is it now the B374 or whatever? So people can actually find the location. And even as time goes on and my books get older, at least the fact that I show that it was called the A6 and then was called the B374, whatever it might be, should enable an investigator to locate which bit I'm actually talking about. So yeah, they're all designed to make it so you can pin down the location.
I tell you, I'm going to use these books the next time I go to England.
Well, if you get a chance to, yeah, really do, because I take so much time over making sure I've pinned down the right location that if you go to the location, that's where whatever it was actually supposed to have happened. And an example of that is in Devon. Loads of sources will tell you, if you look it up, will say that the ghost of Blackerton Bridge is haunted. Well, you try finding Blackerton Bridge on a modern map. Yeah. It isn't on any modern maps. It isn't even known locally as Blackerton Bridge anymore. And the Blackerton Brook has numerous bridges over it. So, road bridges. So any of them could be called Blackerton Bridge. And it took me hours of researching to find a map from, I think it was from the 1700s, which showed where they thought the battle that had happened in the 1600s happened to be near Blackerton Bridge. And that map showed where Blackerton Bridge used to be. And by overlaying that map on current road maps, I was able to pinpoint which bridge it is today that is actually haunted. So it's things like that otherwise you just wouldn't know. It'd be, a 12-mile stretch of road, and the ghost could be anywhere in those 12 miles. But if you look at my books, I'll tell you exactly where it is. In fact, one of the locations, I've even given the grid reference because somebody was able to give me the grid reference for that one.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit before you go about your personal ghost hunting. How does that compare to the stories that you're amassing?
Well, I mean, as a ghost hunter, I'm sure you'll have found the same if you've gone ghost hunting. A lot of your own personal ghost stories are, I went to such and such and nothing happened.
Right.
You have to have endless patience if you're going to be a ghost hunter, because some nights it will happen and some nights it won't.
Right.
But, some of the places I've been to, there's been, a very clear reaction or a very clear something has happened. And one example of that is one of the things I like to do, because my books have shown me that hauntings do not just happen at night, people. That is a myth. They happen all day, all evening, all morning, through the night, whenever they feel like it. So there's no particular need to go ghost hunting in the middle of the night, other than the advantage of that is that the place is much quieter. So therefore you've got, less sort of pollution of other sound and other people and so on. Right. But it's perfectly valid to go ghost hunting in the broad daylight. So if I want to go ghost hunting to a certain location, and bear in mind my husband isn't, particularly into ghost hunting or the paranormal, the best way to do it is to arrange a Sunday picnic, go out for a nice drive somewhere with hubby, and we've got one dog now, one had died, but used to be our two dogs, to one of these locations and have a nice picnic and a nice Sunday day out whilst I ghost hunt the place. And one such location we did was in Northamptonshire, and is a ruined, very, very ancient church. And it's actually built over what they think was probably originally a pagan site, because there's a natural spring comes out under the church. And even today, the stone is still there with the natural spring still running. It's a fascinating place. And we'd gone along there one Sunday with our picnic and the two dogs. This is a few years back. Really hot Sunday afternoon, big thunderstorms floating around slowly. So it was one of those days where it was sort of oppressive and hot, but every now and again you'd get a thunderstorm come over. As we pulled up outside the location, it looked like one of these thunderstorms was about to let loose over us. So hubby said, should we sit in the car and eat our rolls for a minute? And then when it passes over, we'll go and walk around. Yeah, good idea. So we sat in the car. We've rolled the windows down because it's not yet raining and it's quite hot. And the husband says to me, so what's this one supposed to be haunted by? So I said, oh, it's meant to have ghost of a highwayman and the sound of children playing. So he's busy saying to me, why do we have so many ghostly highwaymen in the UK? We can't possibly have had that many highwaymen in real life, and they all get to end up to be ghosts. And I'm busy answering that when the sound of children playing floats through the car.
Wow.
And this church is literally in the middle of nowhere. There's no buildings, there's no houses, the church is ruined, there was no one else present, and the sound of children's laughter and voices floated through the car. And we both just stopped talking and looked at each other and kind of went, well, where did that come from? Couldn't find an explanation for it. So Julie, we finished eating our sandwiches. The storm went on its way. So we got out the car, got the dogs out, went into the churchyard, which at that time was really overgrown with brambles and stinging nettles, with just a little walkway mown round it so you could just walk round the ruins. So we thought, well, nobody's going to mind. This is so unkempt, it's not like it's people's current gravestones or anything. So we'll let the dogs off the lead so they can play. Now we've got one side now, but two big Belgian Malinois dogs, which are very full on, very active dogs, very big. And they were charging around through all this undergrowth and stinging nettles like a pair of lunatics trying to find rabbits and beating each other up. And the husband and I are walking around. And the husband says, so how do you do it when you're on these ghost hunts then? I said, well, people call out to the spirits to see if they can get a reaction. He said, what do you mean they call out? So I said, well, you just say, is there anybody there? Are there any spirits here? Do you want to interact with us? Is there anything you want to say? And you listen to see if anything respond. I said, or you sort of tell them, to come and join in and that it's okay. I said, give it a go. So he said, all right then. So he stood there. Our two dogs are charging around like a pair of lunatics. And he says, if there's any children ghosts here that want to come and talk to us, please do come and talk to us. We're really happy if you come and talk to us. Or you can play with the dogs if you like. They're both friendly. And at that precise moment, our youngest dog, who was an utter lunatic and was only about 2 years old at the time, came bouncing out of the undergrowth he was playing in, about 100 yards away from us and not reacting to us, sat down on the shorter bit of grass facing away from us and leaned up as if he was getting his head scratched by somebody. And me and my husband just went, and I'm fumbling for my camera trying to get pictures of it. Of course, I didn't get the camera out in time and he lost interest and ran off again. I was like, damn it, say it again, see if you can get it to do it again. So my husband says it again. And again, the dog comes bounding out, sits down again, nowhere near us and facing away from us, and again leans up like he's getting fuss from somebody. And this time I've got my camera ready and I took loads and loads and loads of photos. Sadly, nothing but the dog showed up in the photos. But we both felt that it looked like he was leaning up against somebody and getting his head scratched.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Great stuff. I have enjoyed this hour. It has blown by. And I was looking forward to this interview for quite a while. And thank you so much for coming on.
It's been my absolute pleasure. It's been so nice to get to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me.
We would love to have you back, guys. My producers.
Anytime.
Me back there. So what's next for you?
So I'm currently researching for book number 7, she says, quickly counting in her head how many books she's written. Okay. And so that one will be These Haunted Times Volume 3. But I have a horrible feeling it's going to end up being 2 books at once and be volumes 3 and 4 will come out simultaneously. Simply because I've already sort of, the way I work is I put together a skeleton of it and the skeleton is already way oversized, and I haven't even put the prose writing in yet. So it's like, that might have to be 2 books at once. So you might get a bonus this year, people. You might get 2 books out at once.
That's awesome. How can people
Brilliant.
find you?
So I'm on Twitter, just look up Ruth Roper Wylde. I'm on Facebook, again, just look up Ruth Roper Wylde. And my books are available on Amazon and other good bookstores, but you can buy them as ebooks or paperbacks. If you've got Kindle Unlimited, you can read them and American bookstores can order them in for you if they go to the Amazon distribution list as well.
Fantastic. Ruth, again, thank you so much. I'm going to get you back on at some point because I could talk for hours about this stuff. And
me too. Thank you.
Right. Well, you have a good rest of your evening.
Bye
Okay.
Now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Will do. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, that was real fun. I love interviews like this. I love talking, especially British ghosts and Scottish ghosts and all that stuff. That's my thing, outside of my thing here. All right, again, like I told you guys, tomorrow we're up in the air about who's going to be on or what's going to be on, whether I'm going to be reading or it's going to be a best of show. Like I said, I was gone for a week. Didn't have, there was no time during that week while I was on vacation to book people. So I'm in catch-up mode. So you guys are just going to have to watch and see what's going to happen tomorrow. But I want to thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. And if you like what you saw, be sure to hit that like button, especially if you're watching from Facebook, or you're watching from Twitter, or you're watching from Twitch, or even people that have come over from TikTok. That'd be great if you could hit that like button. If you're watching from YouTube, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. We've got more than 500 videos sitting over there, all different topics. So I think there's something for everybody over there that you'll like. In the meantime, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to share Ruth's information with you so that you can get a hold of her and find her books and stuff. And then I will see you one way or another tomorrow at 6:30, whether it's like I said, whether I'm going to be reading, whether I have a guest, or whether it's going to be a best of show. So here we go. Let's put the cherry on top of this sundae. So the website would be facebook.com/Ruth Roper Wylde, WYLDE / and you got The Ghost of Marston, Vale, These Haunted Times, Volume 2. The Almanac of British Ghosts, you've got These Haunted Times, Volume 1. It looks like I flashed them twice. Look at that. I'm losing my mind. Look, there they are again. I must have been half asleep. Okay, and you can get all of her books, including the new book and probably one that I missed because I'm an idiot, at Amazon.com or other book retailers. Okay, I will see you guys one way or another, tomorrow, and have a good evening and have a great rest of your day.